Hello, everyone. This is Professor Sexton with a video lecture on Othello Act 1 and Act 2. First of all, let me begin by saying that I know that a number of people have anxieties when it comes to reading a Shakespearean play for various reasons. Some is that, the length of the plays, and most of them have to do with the language, because the way that a Shakespearean play is written is in a language that we do not currently use now. Same words, but the syntax is different. It can be challenging. Some of the advice that I'm going to give to you as you begin to read Othello is, first of all, go slowly. Um, take your time with it. Second of all, if you are able to, it helps to read Othello out loud, because keep in mind that this is a play and it was written to be performed. And when it was originally performed, most people would not have read it; they would have heard it instead of reading it. So if you can read it out loud and start to hear the language, then some of those things that you think are difficult will start to make sense to you. And then, third of all, do not overly concern yourself if you do not get every single solitary reference in Othello. So as you're reading the play, and if there are parts of it that doesn't make sense to you and you just can't get them, um, don't over concern yourself with that, because when you get the general gist of the story, you can still uh, get the beauty of the play. Um, Othello is an interesting play because the main character is Othello, who is a general in Venice. And this is going to be roughly around the 1400s. He's called a Moor. And what a Moor is, it's not a term that we use that often anymore, because now it's thought more of a derogatory term, but it's dark skinned people from Spain or Morocco. During this time period, we would most likely call them black, but it's not 100% black. But they are darker skinned, especially when you compare it to people of European descent. And so he's called the Moor. Now, in this play, he's often referred to the Moor, and Othello himself calls himself the Moor. You'll have to determine when you're reading the play whether, when those references are being made to him as a Moor, whether they are derogatory or not. Um, Another main character in it is Iago, and Iago is Othello's a general, and Iago is kind of like his second in command. And throughout the play, he's called Othello's ancient, which just means it's someone, a close friend of his, someone that he's known, and they fought together in many, many battles over the years. But what happens with the play is Othello has to choose a lieutenant. And Iago feels that because he's known Othello so long and the two of them have fought together in so many battles, that he is the most rightful person to be Othello's lieutenant. However, instead of Othello making Iago his lieutenant, he makes another man, Michael Cassio, his lieutenant. And when this happens, it irritates Iago, that he wants to get revenge on Othello. And by and large, the play is mostly about Iago working out how he's going to get revenge on Othello for Othello not making him his lieutenant. And what you'll find through Iago as a villain is that he uses people to get what he wants. And when Act One opens up, one of the people that he's using is a man by the name of Rodrigo. Rodrigo. Rodrigo, who is a minor character in the play by and large, is in love with Desdemona. Desdemona is the daughter of one of the senators of Venice. But Othello has won Desdemona's heart, and not only has he won Desdemona's heart, Othello and Desdemona are now married. So what Iago does is he's going to make Brabantio, and Brabantio is Desdemona's father, upset that his daughter, Desdemona, has married Othello. And so what he does with Rodrigo, and here's the thing about Rodrigo is also in love with Desdemona, but Babanchio has told him, my daughter is not for you. And also Desdemona has no interest in Rodrigo at all. Matter of fact, I think in the play, Desdemona and Rodrigo don't ever encounter each other for throughout 5 acts of the play. So what Iago does is Iago uses Rodrigo's love for Desdemona as a way to convince Rodrigo to work on his side. And one of the first things that they do is they go to Brabantio's window to warn him, or not to warn him, but to let him know that Othello has married Desdemona. And what you'll see with Iago and a lot of this is Iago makes a lot of references to sex throughout the play. I mean, it's just simply there. Um, when Iago and Rodrigo go to Brabantio's house, one of the things that Iago says, and also I should tell you that with this version of Othello that we're reading, it's not about page numbers, it's about line numbers. So when you're reading the play, look at line numbers. But this is around line 97. And Iago says, even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe. Because Othello's black, Desdemona is white. And so this whole issue of interracial relationships is very centered to the relationship between Desdemona and Othello, and Iago uses it. And Brabantio is very upset about this, which is kind of tricky because you'll find out later that Brabantio really likes Othello, but he likes him, but not enough to marry his daughter. And so as Brabantio learns that Desdemona and Othello are now married. Brabantio thinks the only way that my daughter would have gone with Othello is that if he used some magic or some charms to woo her. And this is stereotype, right? Because Othello is black and Zamora from Spanish Moroccan descent. So Brabantio is assuming that because of his descent, because of his color, because of where he is, from where he's from, that he's used magic or charm, because surely his daughter Desdemona would not have fallen in love with Othello of her own free will, right? And so Brabantio repeats this over and over again. Um, Also, let's backtrack to Iago. Iago is playing a very clever game here. So even though he's seeking revenge on Othello, he is still making Othello think that he is his friend and that he has his back. So like throughout most of the play, Act 1 through mainly to Act 4, Othello still believes that Iago has his best interest in mind. Othello constantly refers to Iago as honest Iago. I mean, as you're reading the play, notice how many times Othello will call Iago honest or honest Iago. It happens over and over in the play. But here's the beauty of a Shakespearean play, especially one like this. We as readers or audiences, we know what's going on with Iago. We know what Iago's plans are. We know that he's the villain. We know that he's out to ruin Othello. So, as an audience member and as a reader, we know something that characters do not know. So, it's not so much of a play that we're reading to find out what happens, because we already kind of know that. We're reading the play to find out how characters deal with how they're being manipulated. And as I said before, one of the main people who's being manipulated is Othello. Rodrigo is being manipulated as well, because what Iago is telling Rodrigo is that if you give me money, um, I will win your case, and eventually you will win Desdemona back, which is not true. So eventually this all comes to a head. The Duke of Venice has called Othello because the Turks are at sea and about to attack Venice. And so they need Othello to go fight because he is a general. And so that's the first reason why Othello is called. But Brabantio comes and has this suit because he says, Othello has stolen my daughter. Time and time again in Act One, Brabantio would use the word thief and that his daughter has been stolen from him. We finally meet Othello. And when we first meet him in the first speech that he gives, he's very calm. His language is articulate. He's sensible. He's rational. He's reasonable. Probably the most reasonable, rational person in the play. Him and the Duke at the very beginning. Othello says in one part that rude in speech I am, but he's not rude in speech. He speaks very well, and he knows how to express himself. And so when Othello, Brabantio are in front of the Duke asks Othello, "What is it that you did in order to win Desdemona's love?" And what Othello explains is that Brabantio, Desdemona's father, loved him and often had him over the house. And why Othello was at the house, Othello told all of these stories about his life, about the adventures that he had, about the dangers that he underwent. And Desdemona was there listening. And she ate these all up. And she felt pity and sympathy for him. And Othello says that she loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. So Brabantio's claim that Othello has won Desdemona with magic and charms proves to be wrong. But then eventually, Desdemona comes on the scene, and Brabantio's asks Desdemona outright, "How is it that you've fallen in love with Othello?" And Desdemona says this, and this is around about line 209. She says, "My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty. To you I am bound for life and education, but here's my husband. And so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more, my love, my lord." So she says, I love Desdemona. I love Othello. And Brabantio, when he hears this, he relents, but he's still a little bit upset, because he just didn't want his daughter to marry Othello. And it doesn't really go into much detail why. I mean, what Iago uses is the fact that they're in a interracial relationship. But we don't really get the details of Brabantio there. But this scene plays out. Othello has to go off to war. Desdemona has to decide, or whether Desdemona goes with him or stay. But one of the last things that Brabantio says to Othello, and this is important, he says to Othello, "Look to her more. If thou hast eyes to see, she has deceived her father and made thee." Now, at this stage of the play, you don't know why this is important. But in Act 2, in Act 3, one of the things that Iago is going to do in order to get revenge on Othello is to convince Othello that Desdemona is being unfaithful to him. Brabantio's coming, even though he's not on Iago's side, is something that Iago uses to his benefit. And in the back of Othello's mind, when Iago starts to poison him against Desdemona, Othello remembers what Brabantio told him. And then it begins to work on Othello's mind. Because what you begin to see in this play, you begin to see how in Othello's mind, he begins to believe the lies that Iago has created. Act 1 ends with Iago talking to Rodrigo. And what he says consistently is, "Put money in our purse." And he says it over and over again. Because Rodrigo is thinking that, I'm never going to get Desdemona. She's never going to fall in love with me. I might as well kill myself. And he's like, um, Iago keeps like, put money in that purse. And the reason why Iago is saying that is because what Rodrigo is doing is Rodrigo is giving money to Iago, because Rodrigo thinks that by giving money to Iago, Iago is going to be able to win Desdemona for him, which that is not Iago's intentions whatsoever. He is simply using Rodrigo, and Rodrigo is too much of a fool to realize that. Act two switches, and because now it's where there's no battle in this play, even though in Act One we heard that the Turks were approaching. But what happens is there's a storm at sea. The word that is used in Shakespearean plays is the word tempest, but tempest means storm. So there's a tempest or storm at sea. And because of the storm at sea, the Turks are not able to invade. So it hinders their progression or drowns their ships and things of that nature. So the battle is won without there being a battle. And so everyone's there celebrating to a certain extent. Desdemona's there. And then Cassio. This is when we're introduced to Cassio. And Cassio is the man who was made Othello's lieutenant over Iago. So in some sense, Iago also is, he also has it out for Cassio. So one of the things that Iago does in Act Two, he's figuring out a way for Cassio to lose his position. And so what he does is he gets Cassio drunk. Cassio says that, he doesn't have the stomach for alcohol. I mean, like he's already had maybe one beer or one glass of wine, and he tells Iago, I can't have any more because I don't hold my alcohol well. But Iago pressures him, and Cassio drinks more. Then what Othello does is Othello gets the fool Rodrigo to attack Cassio. And so when Rodrigo attacks Cassio, now that Cassio has been drinking, and we know that Cassio cannot hold his alcohol, he fights back violently. And then there's another man, Montano, who's not a very important character in the play either. But, there's a confarfo between Rodrigo, Cassio, and Montano, and Montano is injured. And then there's a loud noise and things of that nature. And then Othello comes out, it's like, what's going on? What's the matter here? And then Iago, who is so slick, Iago, the man is so slick. So he starts to take up for Cassio. But even though he takes up for Cassio, it's a little bit too late, because Montano says that he was wounded by Cassio, and when that happens, Othello removes Cassio from being his lieutenant, and he says, this is what Othello says. He says, I know, Iago, thou honesty. And once again, we have that reference again to Othello calling Iago honest. I know, Iago, thou honesty and love do miss this matter. And so what Othello is saying here, and Iago telling the story, he was trying to make it not seem so bad for Cassio. But Othello is thinking, yeah, I know what you're doing, Iago. You're trying to make it not look bad for Cassio. And then so what Othello says, Cassio, I love thee, but never more be officer of mine. So rather quickly in the play, I mean, this is over like maybe 5 or 6 hours. Cassio has already lost his position. So the play opens up with Iago being jealous or envious because Othello has chosen Cassio as his lieutenant. But like already, like in a short matter of time, Iago has managed to work his, for lack of a better word, let's call it magic, has been able to work his magic, and Cassio has already lost his position as lieutenant. And you would think that at this stage of the play, that Iago would be happy, right? I mean, because the reason why he was first upset was because Cassio was chosen as the lieutenant over himself, where here Cassio has lost that position. But this is not enough for Iago because he continues, because he wants to dig the knife in deeper. So his next goal is to make it seem as if Cassio and Desdemona are in a relationship. Now, earlier in Act 2, Cassio has sang the praises of Desdemona about how fair she is and how beautiful she is and how wonderful she is. Not in any romantic sense, he just admires her as a person. Once again, this is something that Iago hears that he's able to use. So, what he does is now that Cassio has lost his position as a lieutenant, he tells Cassio the best way to get position back is not to go to Othello, but go to his wife. So he convinces Cassio that the best thing to do is go to Desdemona and get Desdemona to plead your case to Othello. But see, here's what's going to happen. As Iago continues to poison Othello's mind against Desdemona and convince him that Desdemona is unfaithful and unfaithful with Cassio, Desdemona is going to start talking to Othello to try to get Cassio his place. So in Othello's head, when Desdemona is talking about Cassio, because he's been poisoned by Iago, all of this stuff is going to start to mix up in his head, and he's not going to be really clear what is true and what is not. So this is the second part of Iago's plan. So it's all about Iago seeking revenge. Now, Iago is a very interesting character in this play as a villain. Um, because also the way that the play is structured, there are moments, and you'll see this when you're reading the play, where you're seeing italics aside, ASIDE. In those moments of the play, if this was being performed, this is a moment when Iago or another character is on the stage by him or herself, and they're speaking their thoughts out loud. And so we hear as readers and as audience everything that Iago is planning to convince Othello that Desdemona is being unfaithful. So rather quickly in this play, Act 1, Act 2, we've already beginning to see Iago work, as I said before, for lack of a better term, his magic. And, convincing Rodrigo to give him money, convincing Rodrigo to participate in his revenge plot, losing Cassio his position as lieutenant, I mean, rather quickly. And then also to the next step. And there's also something that Iago says a few times in this play, that he says a few times that there's a rumor that Othello is sleeping with his own wife. So Iago is married to this woman named Amelia. She's a minor character in the play. We'll see her every now and then. She becomes more important towards the end because some questions about, there's things that she knows and she remains silent. And you ask yourself, she could have prevented this had she spoken up, yet she does not. But anyway, in these beginning scenes, Iago says a few times that there's a sense that Othello has been sleeping with his wife. And once again, keep in mind with Iago's view of Othello, Iago is very concerned with sex. I mean, throughout this play, particularly Act 1 and Act 2, he makes references time and time again to the sexual relationships between Desdemona and Othello. I know I read one, but you'll find other ones as well. And you'll start to ask yourself, what actually is going on with Iago? Is he jealous of Othello? Is he jealous of Desdemona? Because there seems to be a lot just because he didn't get a promotion. So he's a very interesting character study in this play. As I said before, reading a Shakespearean play can be challenging. which I completely understand. Go slowly. If you can, read out loud. Do not be disheartened if you cannot understand every single word. If you can get the general gist of it, you'll be fine. So I know like today we covered Act 1, Act 2. The next video lecture will be Act 3. Take your time as you're reading this play. If you have any questions or if anything is unclear, send me an email and I'll be more than happy to explain those to you. Take care, everyone. Bye.